We're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to call our long-term finance planning committee meeting to order. Today is Thursday, April 24th, 2025. The time is 11:06, and I am calling this meeting to order. I am Chair Jennifer Crossley, and we have two council members that are here. To my right, we have Marty Hawk and Liz Fidel. So I would like to go ahead and move on to the next agenda item, which is the adoption of agenda. And we got that sent to us, so I just wanted to look to the committee members to see if there was any changes that needed to be made or adjusted for the agenda.
I thought, and this might be a part of some of the rest of these discussions, because I'd been asked, are we going to discuss the KSA this evening or this afternoon? So it might be a part of other discussions.
Yes, we can. That was a topic that was going to be discussed, and so that's under, at least that was what I wanted to ask, and that is under other items that we can bring up.
Okay. Okay.
Is that good?
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. And so can I get a motion to adopt today's agenda?
So moved.
All right. We got a motion and a second. All those in favor of adopting today's agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. All right. All right. The next thing that we would have on our agenda is the approval summary minutes. The last long-term finance committee meeting was February 21st, 2025, which feels like so long ago. But nonetheless, we got the minutes for it, and I read it, and I didn't see any changes or anything that needed to be made. Did any committee members see any changes that needed to be made? Okay.
I also read them and I'm willing to make a motion to approve.
I've been studying what's going on at the state and didn't have time to read minutes, so. And I'm not allowed to say pass, so I guess I have to say no. Is that right?
Pass.
I can say pass. Okay, everybody make up their mind.
You just abstain, right? Yeah.
They never couldn't do that.
We could
I'm
also
trying to
say
do
second.
what people tell me to do when I can.
Okay, we got it. Yeah.
So if a person doesn't read the minutes and does not want to vote on the minutes, what would be, in looking at council or County Attorney Jeff Cockrell, what would be the proper way of moving about going that, and so we can do that moving forward?
I think you just abstain from,
That's right.
you just say I abstain.
That's what I did last time when
Okay.
I was new and I wasn't at the meeting
I just
before
wanted
that.
to make sure. So, okay.
I was always told abstain meant you
Okay.
had a personal interest, financial interest, so
All right.
whatever.
So since you didn't read them and we already know how you're going to vote, can we get a motion, please?
I made the motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, and I'll second that. All those in, well, yeah, all those in favor of approving today's minute, or February 21st, 2025 minutes signify by saying aye. Aye. Any other? Okay. Minutes have been approved. All right, so we will go ahead to item number 4, which is the update on Senate Bill 1, and we have Mr. Garritas here. So go ahead with your presentation. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Again, I'm Greg Garritas. I'm president of Financial Solutions Group, which is a team of financial advisors back in Plainfield, Indiana. And so we've been working very, very hard on a lot of cities, towns, counties, and Marty, let me know if I'm not talking loud enough. I'm
No,
trying to.
I'm reading it now.
Okay, good,
so
good.
But I can hear you always.
I think one of the keys is we could not have named this committee any better, okay? Because it's named the Long-Term Finance Planning Committee, and guess what? The term just got longer, okay? And why do I say that? Because you're going to see in some of these documents, we're going out to 2031. This SB1 is probably one, in my years of doing this, it's one of the most significant and probably the most changing. Now, to qualify it, and Councilmember Hawk said it right, the boys and girls, and I call them boys and girls, the men and women have not gone down from downtown Indianapolis yet. They've not gone away, okay? So I like to say every number you see or every comment you hear today is as of 4:24:11 a.m., okay? And not to be construed to contain anything after 11:01. Okay, and the reason why is, as you know, the DLGF bill's not done yet. And I can take you back to 10, 15 years ago, one-liners came in the DLGF bill and really hurt some people and hurt some levies and things like that. So I just want to be very, very careful that we don't assume things going forward. So 11:24:11 a.m. Or 4:24. I want to go through this sheet first, and then I'm going to go through this summary. But one of the most significant changes is obviously how it's going to impact property taxes and how it's going to impact income taxes, which, if you recall from my other presentations, you've got basically 3 sources of revenue: property, income, and everything else, called miscellaneous revenue, which, by the way, it's my understanding the level 6 miscellaneous revenue is probably in Shelby County, it's going to be 1/4 of what it was in Hancock County, or it's going to be 1/4 of what it was. So in those counties, in Hancock, $1 million will probably be at 250,000. In Shelby County, we're talking about what was a couple 100,000 will be 80,000. Those things are coming, and that's the best estimate. So miscellaneous revenue isn't going to do a lot, okay? What's going to happen now on this top section on the property taxes, at this point in time, the changes to the homestead deduction phases in 2026 to 2031. And if you don't mind, maybe you've got a lot of space there. If you open up and go to page 1 of the handout here, then we can kind of see it right here. And Liz asked me if we could provide other home levels, 250 and 750, and I text my staff and they'll be working on that, and we'll have that for you, because that's a really good point.
So I just want to interject just really quick, because we have it here and I see folks in the back don't have it on the screen. Is this, yes?
The document they provided this morning is available online under the event calendar for this meeting.
Is there a way that we can maybe share
Yes,
screen? Okay,
I will do
thank
that
you, because
now.
I know Councilor Hogg would like to see it on the screen, and I'm sure people in the back would be as well.
So the whole point is the whole thing will be phased in between now and 2031. Go ahead.
Question, since I haven't had time to study this.
Sure.
The $300 or 10%, whichever is less.
The credit.
Which is going to be a credit and not a deduction. And you might want to explain the difference of why it's different if it's deduction or credit. But it seems to me if we look at everything that's, am I looking at this right? If it's a $300,000 house, then we know it's going to be spot on that $300. Everything over that is going to be the $300, because it's going to be the lesser of 10% or 300. So the ones under 300, you'd have to figure the 10% because it's going to be less than 300. Is that a part of what we're looking at? Because it looks like, I'm just saying, if that's not what we've looked at so far, I would think it would be something we could research to see how many. And is it the assessed value, the market assessed value that we're looking at for the 300 or the 10%?
No. And if you go, it is my understanding is not. This is in page 2. What you already jumped to page 2. So let's go to page 2.
I'm sorry.
No problem. No
Just
problem. And what you do, remember, deductions are off of the assessed valuation, and you see it here on page 2 where we've used the calculations there. And you see the $48,000 deduction, and then the percentages. Those are all deductions. Credits are dollar amounts, okay? And they're special credits, so they're, when you talk about 150 or you talk about the 300, it's off of the, basically, it's the dollar amount is taken off as a credit. And the point of the 10% is they don't want negative tax bills, okay? So if you would get so low that the 300 would take it negative, then as it says here, the lesser of 300 or 10%, okay? And so that's the real reason. And keep in mind, so I tell every taxpayer, please, you know, number one, it is also my understanding that you have to apply for the deductions. They're not automatic, okay? So that's pretty important. And is that your understanding, Bree? Yeah. So
About the credit, do you have to apply for the credit? Because that should almost be automatic.
Ma'am, I believe you do have to apply for the credit, even the over 65, yes.
But 300,
Any credit, it is my understanding you have to apply for it.
well, that would be,
So-
let's check that out, because
Sure.
if they're tying it to the assessed value, would they,
It's not being tied to the assessed value, the credit, okay? The credit is on the net assessed value, and it's an actual dollar amount of credit to the bill,
So it
okay?
comes off the tax itself.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
the credit.
even if you don't have any kind of over 65 or veterans or anything, that 300 or 10%, whichever is less, is still available to everybody, correct? Whatever, we can talk about that later.
Yeah. So we'll clear that up. And again, there's so many ifs, ands, and buts in the bill. Remember, this is some things that will take place coming up. I mean, right now you see it applied in 26. So it's for payable 26, not to be misunderstood that you have to run to the auditor's office in the next 10 minutes to get your deduction, okay? And so we don't want to have everybody get off of the webcast and come running down here. And so, you know, this is for 2026. And Bree, where are you in the whole process of updating AVs and all that other stuff? Working hard.
That's exactly
Yes.
right, yes.
So okay.
Can I ask, just to clarify, because that was something that you said that just kind of went off in a light bulb. So you're basically saying for the deductions and credits, people will have to apply for those?
I'm going to say credits.
Okay.
I'm not going to say deductions. Deductions are, in my view, automatic.
Okay.
What shows up on the first page, the standard deduction, the supplemental homestead deduction, and things like that. It's the over 65 and disabled homeowners, disabled veterans. Again, that's the general understanding. Okay, and Jeff will be getting back to you if there's any corrections that need to be made. Page 2, then, that's where the lesser of 3% or 10% of net property tax bill, again, doesn't really affect these. It's affecting whether we get a negative bill, okay? And that's when it kicks in, okay? So and you see here, I used 500,000 on page 2, and that's just to give you the path, the glide path that I was trying to get at in number 1. Number 1 is we expect the assessed valuation of residential property to go down 7 to 8% per year, and so that will drive down assessed value. There isn't, let's face it, in Senate Bill 1, it's driving down AV in every bucket, okay? And so apartments, driving that down, the farmland is not going to grow as much. Personal property, it's going down. So what happens? AV goes down, tax rate goes up. As a result, we get more circuit breaker, really.
And you mean the net assessed value is going down, not the gross? They're still
No,
going to.
exactly. Net assessed valuation. Now, yes, so you're a quick study. The offset to that is getting new AV to move into the county. Okay, that will increase AV. So the question is, in some counties, can the growth offset the reduction? Okay, so when I make a general statement about the tax rates going up, the good news here in Monroe County is that we have awful small circuit breaker. Our circuit breaker is not that large because our tax rate is pretty good. So any comments or anything you hear from other counties, please don't apply them here, because I told you this every time I meet with you. Monroe County is different, and I know that, okay? And so, it's going to be the growth that occurs, and if it offsets or helps to offset, then the tax rate does not go up as much. Then, we don't push everybody into circuit breaker, which is ultimately kind of the goal of SB 1, and as I understand it, is to get everybody to circuit breaker. So when there is a change, then, basically you're not, if you increase the tax rate and borrow more, you're not putting it on other entities, okay? You're not shoving more circuit breaker to the city, and the city can't vice versa do it. It might happen here a little bit yet because your circuit breaker is so low, okay? And so that has, generally we're saying circuit breaker will probably go up 15% per year. And I had it in my original draft of my sustainability, but guess what? I tore that sustainability up, and we're now going to make it probably 5 years rather than 3 years. I've got the draft here, and that's going to be critical from your standpoint and everybody's standpoint when we went out to 2028. If we're going to plan salaries, or if we're going to plan anything, we're going to have to go out 5 years, okay? So
Just to make sure, because I know I heard it, but I just want to clarify. You're basically saying that if we can make sure that we grow into the county, that net assessed value goes up as well as circuit breaker. But that's something that we need to do.
Oh, yes,
would
we
think.
need to have smart economic growth.
I
What
just
is
wanna make
that
sure.
defined as? That is defined as putting new AV on the books.
Yep.
Okay? And new AV was never assumed in any LSA report or anything like that. And so if we could, really get that AV growth by having, things not in a TIF district and new development and things like that. Now, I will caution you that, if personal property will react a little differently, and my comments aren't on that. But yes, that can be a good offset. So, I like to say my economic development doors are wide open, okay? And why not? So, and what I was trying to do is, Bree, you probably don't know, but I had it in the draft of the sustainability, and I was looking for the amount of circuit breaker right now, if you know, and I won't be able to get it at my fingertips, but it is pretty low here. So that's going to be critical. Yes, let's keep our economic development doors wide open, and good quality economic development is crucial. It will help the glide path be not as steep down. Does that make
Are you
sense?
talking both personal economic development, homes, as well as business, or is there a differentiation?
Well, let's go to, so let's talk about then number 3, the personal property change. So remember, I like to say, when we talk about business, okay, I was here when Bobby Knight threw the chair across the floor, okay? The chair is personal property, okay? Assembly Hall at that point in time was real property, okay? So when you talk the businesses now, any new, you got to go to number 3. So personal property, any new personal property will not have a minimum floor assessed valuation. Remember, I kept telling you, personal property is going to go away. I've been saying that for 5 years, okay? Well, guess what? It's going away, okay? So, you know, most of the small businesses, let's go to the top part of number 3 there. It says 80,000 went to $1 million, $1 million went to $2 million, let alone the new floor on new property put in after this year will not have the 30% floor. So we can go as far down as 5%. And someone asked the question, well, what, does that affect tools, jigs, and dies? They actually said special tools. It's on the Form 103 as special tools. That only had a 3-year life anyways, okay? So the floor really didn't matter. If you, you know, I worked for Tippecanoe County in different auto plant areas, and, you know, that would be millions and millions and millions of dollars on every type of car. And so that went to zero after the 3rd year usually. So, yes.
Is this still self-reporting?
Yes. It's using federal depreciation guidelines. It is using the pool. And now I like to make everybody aware, there is not one Form 103. There are multiple Form 103s. Okay. There's about 3 or 4 Form 103s. And we're seeing this when we come to the data centers, the amount that in the future here that will be calculated, it could be calculated differently, and IT has its own Form 103. So there's sub 103s now. I had them printed off in my office, and I believe there's about 4 or 5. Okay, so personal property, back to your question. So business personal property, I'd like to say, unless it's really $100 million of personal property coming in, you know, it'll stay around for a little bit, but, you know, it's not going to stay around very long. Real property is going to, Assembly Hall is staying there, right? Still there. It's just not called that. Okay. And so, you know, that's going to hang around for a long time. So residential also will have the same value. It'll just come down as far as net AV a lot quicker than it was before. But keep in mind, tax rate's going up. Okay, AV goes down, tax rate goes up, getting the same $100 of levy. Okay, so I think, let's see, if I went to that, so we springboard ahead, and the property tax deductions, let's see, personal property, that was already on the sheet called summary, okay? But that was also over here, and, you know, the amount taking off, and the real point is the 30% floor not existing anymore, and how fast that depreciation is on personal property, and I'm just not counting on it. Now, we showed you here that about 7.2, all these numbers are subject, Bree, we calculate 7.2% of your total AV is personal property. Now, that's a pretty big number, okay? That's a pretty big number. And so that's bigger than other places, and I've got places bigger than that. But for this, I was kind of surprised it was 7.2%. I was kind of thinking it might be lower. Yes.
How much of that is inside the TIFs?
Well, now, I'm not aware of us having, we don't have personal property in the TIF anymore.
Prairie Profile is the only TIF district where we collect personal property.
Okay, and we collect it on what entity?
It's the GE building, and I don't think there's not any real personal property there right now.
Yeah, so Marty, I want to really dissect the question and make sure when you say TIF, personal property in the TIF, it only matters because we only designate it by personal property payer. We don't do a blanket when it's in a TIF district, okay? You can't say in this square box TIF district, we capture all real and we capture all personal. No, I've been on the RDC working with them for a long, long time. You have to designate the one taxpayer, and that's what I thought is we only had one taxpayer designated. So don't say all personal would be captured by the TIF in the TIF district. No, only one entity.
I just was and I don't know the answer to this, how much of the downtown, all these apartment buildings that went up, and we're talking personal property, if somebody owns a lot of apartments and they've got a lot of refrigerators, whatever.
Yeah, now that I don't know. I have not done
okay.
studies on apartments in downtown Bloomington, so no, I wouldn't know that. And, but yeah, that could be, but that would probably start falling under number 3, where you went from 80 to 1 million to 2 million. I think it's going to be wiped out, Marty, because unless it adds up to, $5 million worth of all of that, I don't think that would make any sense. Yeah, wouldn't add up. Okay. The number 4 is the only, I told you on number 4 on this sheet, okay, the growth quotient, they basically handed you a carrot on the end of the stick, and the growth quotient was assigned at 4%. Now, I had one council member, not from Monroe, but they called me yesterday and they said, well, we're rich. And I said, wait a minute. He said, you said it was going to be 0. And I said, up until this version, it was going to be probably 0. It was really going to be 0. You know that. It was in many, many bills. And it was going to be 0 and then 0 and then 1, 2, 3. And so they put in 4. And that's basically, keep in mind, we're with the circuit breaker going up. If the 4%, if we get 4% on our current levy, Bree, I had it calculated out as $1 million, about $1,022,000. And so, but because circuit breaker will go up, I'm going to discount it to about maybe $800,000 on real dollar increases. But, I guess the answer is it's better than 0. Okay, but because AV will go down and we're trying to increase the tax rate, okay, we're trying to going to get that 4% and whatever we can of the other levy, then, that will have some significant impact on circuit breaker. And remember, it'll happen in Bloomington too, so all that will add up, okay? So that's the concern, is you might think you're going to get 4, but you won't get 4 in actual cash. And let me remind you, circuit breaker, when you set your budget, you say in the general fund, you say, I want, property taxes, let's say in the 1782, I'll just use an example, 17 million, okay? So you set your budget based upon 17 million. Do you get 17 million? No, you get less, right? Because of circuit breaker. So actual cash recognition other than if someone pays late, and we won't even go there. But, the actual cash recognition is less because of circuit breaker.
When you mentioned 17, we know that that number was really supposed to be quite a bit more than that.
Yeah, I would.
So when we do our projections, what number then, we wouldn't use the 17, would we?
25 million?
What?
25 million. I'd set it very, very high. I always do, okay? I always set the advertisement very, very high.
High, yes.
Yeah.
So you couldn't, there's,
Right, because you never know, okay? Now, one of the things you and I remember is that there was something called bank levy that was taken away 10, 15 years ago in an SB1 or in a DLGF bill by one line. And so I'm just saying, let's just move cautiously ahead. And when it comes to the 2026 budget, everything will be advertised appropriately.
might not have been in this bill, it might have been in another one, but there was one that said if your levy grew more than a certain amount, and then you would have to reduce.
I believe
so
that.
that you aren't getting any kind of a windfall.
Yeah, I believe that was running around in the DLGF bill and still may be. So,
Well, that's not been voted on unless since
Correct.
we've been sitting here.
this morning, but I don't believe so. As of last night, I hadn't heard it. But again, so that's why I said April 24th, 11 a.m. Okay, and we're gonna do longer term planning, and we're going to be very strategic each time we do it. Okay, so.
I ask a question real fast?
Go ahead.
A question, what it sounded like to me is that you are predicting at some point in the future, probably near future, our property tax caps are going to be what governs the amount of revenue we're going to get. And so that basically you'll be able to look at the assessed value, 3%, 2%, 1%, and do the math and be like, well, this is the amount that we're going to be able to tax for, as opposed to right now it's more driven by the county council's action of setting rates and things like that.
Correct.
Do you have a time frame for that?
I think it's in years. But, it's going to, Jeff, that was a total estimate or total somewhat guess, because again, it's going to get down to how high the tax rate gets, how much it goes up versus how, we've got a calculatable decline to AV. We don't have the offset of the increase in AV. And so, it'll be somewhere in between.
But when you issue your sustainability report, will that concept be somewhere in there?
I will hope so. If not in text, in numbers, but it'll be something that again will be as of the date it happens. Because unless Bree can tell me with absolute certainty, or the county council, that we will have 5% growth in AV for the next 5 years, which nobody can, and therefore it would have to be a range, so to speak, right? Because
That works
that's
for me.
the offset.
I'm interested to see what your guys' opinion on that issue.
Yeah. Okay. Well, stay tuned. So that is the good news. So we talked about number 5 back on this one sheet, okay, that results of 1 and 4 equals lower assessed valuation will increase circuit breaker. I've already told you that, okay? And so real dollars of collection of property taxes in each of the supported funds gets to be critical in the future. Okay. So anything else that you might want to talk about on property taxes? If not, I'd like to shift a gear. And by the way, do we have a cutoff time? just to make sure I'm on time?
We don't.
Okay.
But we do.
Realistically, everybody has a
We just want
life.
to keep the train going, so, yeah.
So it's a
yeah.
quarter till 12.
Okay.
And so do we have till at least quarter after, or
You're
was?
fine. You can
Okay,
just keep
perfect.
going. Yeah.
So any questions on property taxes that you saw, and we've got other agenda items, obviously, but this is the summary, so I'd like to shift to income taxes.
I just
now.
asked real quick,
Pardon me?
okay, when we're looking at, we all know that our CUME funds, because it's rate controlled, it's really had been having windfall. Because that rate times a higher assessed value is going to draw in more money there in CUME funds. Will those CUME funds then have to be a part of our 1.2 operational income tax down the road? And what do you suggest we do? Do we leave it at the 0.0333? Do we start adjusting that down so that we don't hit the circuit breaker as high?
No.
What do you
I
suggest?
would highly keep it at 0.033. Remember, and this is going to kind of hit the target fund balance, because I talked to Angie a little bit about the CUME Capital Development Fund.
Yeah.
That my concept about not having a minimum target balance or a target balance in the CUME fund is, let's go back to the definition of a CUME fund. The definition of the CUME fund is it should accumulate and get a balance in it that is used, and you remember I gave you a little concept of debt to equity in the last presentation, and some believe it's 40-60, 60-40, but that is our equity fund and will be our equity fund. Edit was seeded, edit, I call them the same thing. That was some of our capital funds that were available, and so was our bonds, and there's some things happening there. So our CCD will become more valuable. You must retain it, I believe, at the same rate. Otherwise, you take it down, and then you're going to lose, and you may lose forever. And second of all, the answer is that 0.0333 pennies is so outdated, it's not even funny, okay? That's been around longer than you've been on the council, okay? And so, and it's never been updated.
And that sort of acts as a rainy day separate from the other rainy day.
No, I wouldn't call
It's
it-
kind of like something that we can save for a bigger project down the road.
Yeah, so don't call it a rainy day.
Okay, oh, no, we
Rainy
can't.
day
Only
is
one
for
rainy
when
day.
the tornado hits
Yeah.
the town or the county, and guess what? They've hit. And guess what? I've had some clients call me and say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad we put that emergency line item in the rainy day fund of $250,000 or $500,000, because we were able to get the contractor tomorrow to start clearing the roads. That's what rainy day's all about. That one
I
time.
just remember,
Yeah.
too long, we were using the rainy day like it was like a savings for a capital project. And I do agree with you, we should not be getting into that
Yeah,
for.
it's going to be your last bottom dollar. So the CUME capital should accumulate. It really doesn't need a minimum balance unless you can't keep your hands off of it, so to speak. And not you, but in general, if a county or a city cannot keep their hands off of it and do not see it as a capital equity fund, then we would want to set a minimum. Okay, but at this point in time, it shouldn't be treated that way. So, okay, so let's go to, so then you ventured out in the 1.2, and let's go to the back slide. Okay. So I said I sure wouldn't replace it with the 1.2. So this is probably the most misunderstood by everybody, state legislators and everybody. But, remember, I kept telling you again, there's going to be a cap on LIT. It's just a matter of time. And there was that 2.5% cap, but we weren't close, okay? And so we had what I'm going to call financial breathing room. That is a term that I'm going to say a lot over the next year or two. Financial breathing room is the difference between the cap and basically where you're at. So going forward, and again, I caution everybody, this is a very large boat or aircraft carrier. I call it the Monroe County boat, okay? And it's heading in a direction. And hopefully it's the dream boat. And, and it's going in direction. It's going to take on, some waves, okay? And things are going to, but don't panic and jump off the boat, okay? There's time. They're solidifying a lot, especially on the income tax, because if you ask me, what is the income in Bloomington, Indiana, I'll say, nobody knows, okay? I told you this before, they virtually fenced several municipalities in Hamilton County. And what I mean by virtually fencing is putting up electronic fence, so to speak, and capturing the taxpayers in that area. Well, what's going to be really interesting is how many people everybody raise their hand, we won't make you here, but if you have a P.O. box and you don't have your address on the P.O. box, okay? And so things are going to have to change because, you might live in Boone County but your P.O. box might be in Hamilton County because you like going to that post office.
Or here, we have a Bloomington address clear over into Ellettsville.
Right.
So that they can't go by the addresses.
So virtual fencing, they now tell me, is alive and well in 4 counties. And it was kind of joked yesterday that, wow, that only leaves 88 to go. And so, but it is my understanding, and I think this is general understanding, that certain people wanted the Indiana Department of Revenue to be able to move faster and move towards that. So the income tax sheet makes that real, and we're going to have that come to a theater near you in 27 for 28. Okay, so the clock is ticking. So I'm sure the Indiana Department of Revenue, I wouldn't say anything bad about them. I'm sure they're working very, very hard. And so, but that will be the key to the first line, which is the county service rate of 1.2. That's your cap at this point in time. There's been, and you notice down here, municipalities greater than 3,500, 1.2. There's already been waves coming into the boat, the dream boat of Monroe County, that are saying, well, wait a minute, why should the city be, and I'm not saying Bloomington said this, but what I'm saying is cities and towns are saying, why are we the same rate as the county? County has a bigger adjusted gross income. So when we talk about the 1.2%, remember, we're talking about the entire county, okay? And when you're talking about the 1.2% for municipalities greater than 3,500, we're talking the city of Bloomington and Ellettsville. Yeah. And so that's their own one, and it can be up to 1.2. So as we move cautiously on, thoughts and where we would go on LIT, that right now is our calculation was it takes about 1.0 to replace the current revenues we're getting now.
Revenues from our present income tax.
Pardon me?
To replace the present income tax?
In total, yes. The present
Our portion.
LIT.
Our portion.
Yes.
Of the LIT.
Yeah, we and Bree did it, and we did it, and everybody, we kind of all added up, and it's about 1% to replace our portion, given the estimates at this point in time. So that's what we had put on our sheet, and my sheet's 0.99, but I updated it this morning. So the breathing room that we may have as we go forward may be the difference between 1.2. Now, why is breathing room important? Well, when I'm an analyst in New York City for S&P and Moody's, and the ladies and gentlemen leave downtown Indianapolis, I'm going to read these bills, and I'm going to be concerned, okay? I'm going to be concerned that your property taxes may have ultimately a cap. Your LIT now has an ultimate cap. And guess what you might have to live and breathe on? Growth in income. Income goes up, income goes down, income goes all around. Okay? I've told you in other examples, in other meetings, how much Hamilton County was dependent on one-time bonuses in their AGI. It was huge. And so you could actually see theirs go down, which I never expected. And so, you know, the breathing room, and I'm going to pause here, but the breathing room will be kind of important to think about and really as we get closer. But again, the dream boat, Monroe County boat, is on its course. It's going to stay on its course. It's going to keep looking at the waves that come overboard. And, you know, we're not jumping off the ship. We're just going to react as we have to make services affordable and efficient and provide them. Did you have a question, Jeff? I'm thinking you do.
I
1,000, huh?
yeah, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this, and I've
Yes.
talked with the auditors about it. So it at this point, it's just trying to get a good feel on it. I mean, it made me feel better that none of this was effective until 2027. Because
Well, implement it in 27 for 28.
yeah,
Yeah.
implement it.
Except the deductions and those. But
And I think we'll have a better handle on what it does for property tax, because I worry about that, and so some of that wiggle room is necessary. Our current rate, just so you guys are aware, is 2.14% across the county. So, you know, it looks to me like you have the ability to do up to 1.7 based upon these other categories. So I think that's all important.
right.
So, if I can, since we're speaking of local income tax, right now in this portion of the meeting, there was a SB1 conversation that happened yesterday where local community members were talking, and it's available on CATS for anybody that wants to watch it. And I watched it, and there was a comment that was made that basically says some of the things that are in SB1 basically kind of takes the control away from the city, and for them to do their lit increase. And so it was and I'm trying to write it down to make sure, and I listened to it a couple of times, and I want to make sure that I'm repeating it accurately, but basically, and y'all help me out since I know you were there, and Marty, I know you watched it, but it basically was saying that the city and the county now will have to do some type of collaboration, because what's in SB1 is going to take the city's ability to do any kind of lit, and so now we're going to have to collaborate together. Is that accurate? And I just, again, I want to make sure that I heard it correct, but that was a very interesting comment. I'm all for collaboration for sure, but I just want to make sure what was said in that comment was accurate.
So let me answer it this way, because I've heard that multiple times. SB1 does not have a line in it that says thou shalt collaborate. Okay, so given that, what I do here is on the city's side, we need to collaborate, and all of us need to be a team together in the county. not a bad idea. I've heard it multiple times. Keep in mind, there will be different things that different entities want to achieve that collaboration may not become real on. Okay? Because let's face it, if I go to any county in the state of Indiana and go to the city of Greenfield and say, you want to collaborate on the jail? They're like, no, that's your problem. And, and that's how it would be thrown back. So there's going to be possibilities for collaboration. And like my economic development door is wide open, my collaboration door where it's appropriate is wide open. Okay, and makes sense. But they get their right to do their income tax just like we do, and there will be different reasons to collaborate and not to collaborate on certain things. Does that make sense?
Yes.
If I could add to that. From what and again, I'm no means an expert in the Senate Bill 1 at this point, but I have looked at the income tax. I think the city gets the 1.2 general that is theirs to use. I don't think any of us have and if the people from the city who are here have a handle on that, if they could let us know what that really means in terms of these geofencing that doesn't exist and how that works. I think where the other part where it probably plays a role is in the fire and EMS lit rate that you guys approve, that would get distributed to all the municipalities and it's based upon a formula of population and 20 times road, or not road mile, but square mileage. Again, I don't know what the answer to that is, but that fire part certainly would be, I think, something that you guys.
That's number 2 down here on that list.
I think one of the big things that we would be looking at is there's that fire and EMS does not take the place of, we will no longer have the public safety tax, which is how we pay for central dispatch. So it seems to me the county would not be paying for entire central dispatch, nor would the city. That might take some kind of interlocal of how we're going to pay for central dispatch. And so I don't know how much of that you took into consideration to say this is how much it's going to take to pay for the expenses that we're paying in these other income taxes.
So you hit the nail on the head. It's something that Jeff and I have talked about. It is to be determined as you go forward. Okay.
And having to do with the fire and the EMS, I know that they have to come and ask us and present their case, but we have 0.4 for fire and EMS, and we can't use that up there for operational for the rest of the county or anything. But do we have a list of what is it simply just for covering fire and EMS, or can we cover central dispatch with that?
Boy, do I wish we had a list. No.
Yeah. Okay.
So
The statute seems to indicate that it is fire protection districts, fire territories, municipal fire, and there is an option that I have not researched that deals with volunteer or township fire departments. And then there's a formula that distributes the revenue in accordance with that formula. So I don't think there's a lot of latitude, or any latitude really, from the other than do you include a volunteer or township fire into that calculation?
So I've heard a lot of people say, oh, well, the fire and EMS or that part is equal to public safety. No. If you were paying a bunch of police officers out of public safety, not your story going forward in 2020 at this point in time. Now, when the police officers union heads downtown next year and says we need to tweak this, stay tuned.
We put a lot of things in that public safety, the dollars that are left over after we paid for central dispatch.
Got it right here.
Yeah, and so we've got to start looking at all of the other expenses that we've thrown in there that we might have to just figure out. We will have to just figure out how we're going to get it back into the 1.2.
Again, the glide path for AV down, glide path for implementation of LOIT going up, and working it all together. That's why the long-term finance committee is so important. Financial committee is so important in looking at these as we move forward. Okay, there's a short-term and a long-term path. So, okay.
Can I go back to the municipalities greater than the 3,500, which would be Bloomington, and the conversation that was yesterday? When I look at this page here, on the bottom line, it mentions eliminates local income tax councils. So how is that figured into the fact that they can still do a local income tax ability? Do they still have the local income tax ability based on that statement? You see what I'm asking?
So you'll have your ability to raise your 1.2.
Right.
Bloomington will have its ability to raise 1.2.
Well, where does this language come in?
So the last line is municipalities under 3,500. They do not get.
The last line says more than 3,500.
Pardon me?
The last line says more than 3,500.
So municipalities they get their 1.2, okay? The ones under, so the point is, they get the right, you don't need the income tax council anymore.
Oh, that's the point.
Yes.
Yeah,
So, but they
because
still-
it goes away.
in other words, that income tax council that's alive and well for 26 and 27 goes away, and they're not going to say, oh, wait a minute, we're going to have Monroe County rate be 5.5, okay? That group won't be there.
Okay,
Okay, now, the ones under
right.
3,500, you have to do. Yeah.
Only one, and that's Steinsville, and we would not do 1.2 for
Yes.
Steinsville. That'd be giving them as much as the entire county. And so, no doubt they'll probably come and ask for some, but is there like a increment that we have to tie it to, the minimum of an increment?
Sure. No, I don't believe there's any. You and I remember the 10. You had to go by 10s and 20s
right,
and
right.
30s. No, I don't believe any of that exists. But and it is also my understanding, because I live out in Hendricks County, out in the county. Okay, and if we did it for Amo and for all of the little burgs in Hendricks County, I will pay for Amo even though I don't live in Amo. Okay,
Right.
so that's going to be an interesting question as we go forward.
The decision is not automatic. It would have to be the county council could either choose to do it or not, and they would have to come and ask us with their recommendation of what they need.
That's
Is
my
that
understanding.
correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And everybody in the county, if you live down in Sauls, wherever, Smithville, you'd be paying to operate Steinsville. And that was a big pushback on the,
That's why it says county upon petition from municipal units.
And I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I think it is that I believe that would only, that additional 1.2 for other municipalities, that would be outside any current municipality getting a tax rate. That's my understanding. So the 1.2
right.
would not generate the same amount as the county's total 1.2. Subject to review and all that, but that's the case. But essentially, what I'm understanding and what I understand from reading it is that the city council would control the city-controlled tax rate, and the county council would control these others,
Yeah. Therefore,
or town council.
That's very good to
yes.
clarify, thank you.
yep, sure. Okay. So I guess the question at this point in time, it's 12:10. Do we want any other follow-up questions on LIT, keeping in mind, stay tuned? And what do I feel is we got to make sure the Association of Counties might want to make sure that 1.2 stays and we don't have, I've heard already, city ought to be 1.5 and the county should be not here, but 1.2, And because we got lesser of a tax base, oh my gosh, if we start opening that Pandora's box, but Pandora already at least spoke out, that's not going to be good either, I don't think. So, the parity made some sense. But again, there's a lot. I've already heard thoughts of trailer bills. And I think I asked that yesterday. I've never heard of a trailer bill. Do you know what a trailer bill is?
I was long behind, but explain.
A trailer bill, subject to Jeff, is a bill that kind of like I would call it a technical correction bill.
Yeah.
When there's a super majority, it can be technically corrected without a full-blown session.
Because they left
So-
some little something out that left it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so, that. And obviously, then, everybody is saying, get ready for a 2026 legislative session because it's going to be fast and furious. And lots of changes. So that's why I'm saying, let's not panic. Let's stay on course. Let's be careful. We got to definitely be wise and conscious about our current dollars. And I'm sorry, I understand what we were trying to do the first quarter of this year about increasing salaries and everything like that, but I'm really glad we didn't do it. Okay, because it's going to be at this point in time, I kept saying, why would I advise you to do something like that when I don't even know what's going to happen? And by April 29th at 11:59, if you remember, that's when they're supposed to go home, and they'll go home early. But you got to figure out all these impacts. But start because we got to sustain what we already have in place. Okay. Now, if we can, then let's shift to. I want to go to the health insurance discussion. So. We're working with the auditor's office, and we're working with Angie and the commissioner's office, and we're fine-tuning it. And I think we'll have some increased funding needs in 2026. It's a matter of getting the employees in the right number and things like that. So we're working on that. But keep in mind, I'm still proposing 2 funds, okay? The normal insurance fund, and I had a discussion that I would like to see that have at least, in what we've done in other counties is we maintain about 500,000 in that. So if there's a claims month that is high, we don't drain it down to 0. If there's if there's some surplus, but on average, we try and keep, especially by year end, in the self-insurance fund, which it's my understanding and looking at some numbers yesterday, we're at $9-10 million in total spend for health. And so, 500,000 wouldn't be unreasonable. Then I still want to set up the insurance reserve fund. Do not put rainy day in front of that, okay? Yeah. It's not. You can only have one rainy day fund in the state of Indiana, I'm told. We do have, and we're going to have a Teams meeting with State Board of Accounts. I'm going to suggest, I have $3 million I've been funding in Hendricks County, and Nancy Marsh and I were doing that for the last 5-7 years. And we've never gotten written up when we've gotten audited by outside audit firms. So should be allowed and something that we may need to build up over time, but I'm thinking that's going to have to be 2 to 3 million for those unknowns, because we may be experiencing about $1 million increase from 25 to 26 in our whole total health care needs. $1 million.
Due to the rise in healthcare costs, is that what
Yeah.
we're assuming? Yeah.
And guess what I told you your growth quotient was? It's gone, right there. $1 million, $1 million, okay? And I even told you it probably would be 800,000 or 900,000. So, so again, I said going forward, raises, I'm not even thinking new hires, okay, unless county council wants that. And then group health insurance and everything else.
You're saying You're saying you're not thinking new hires, you don't mean no replacements, or just
didn't
any
go that
new,
far.
an additional person?
Yeah, I mean, if my department, if I come to you and say, my department has 5 people in it, we're overwhelmed, we need a new person, 6 people, I think we got to really be careful there, okay? And not to say that's not legit in some department, I'm just saying, funding raises going to be, and funding group health insurance, and we can already see, possible 11, 12% increase in possible funding for, like I said, it's probably $1 million. Okay, so that's going to be important as the council moves ahead, and I'm saying I would not say, I've got salary committees that are out there in other counties, and they're working like heck, and they've come up with some suggested numbers, and I've heard, higher numbers this year, and then, by the way, it might be 0 for the next 2 or 3 years. So, it's something you need to be very careful with. Okay, I'm going to be very important because we're still trying to sustain what we've put into place last year. Okay, Jeff, Bree, any comment on that? Okay.
I agree.
And so, sorry, Jeff.
Oh, I think we got to look at all that very carefully, and I think that we need to look at that and review when we look at our cash and everything else. So I don't disagree. It needs to be looked at carefully.
And so my concern is the other expenses. Are we going to have an inflationary factor on that of true 5 to 7% because of tariffs or because of lack of product, okay, or things like that? And so, I get up every morning and I listen to Bloomberg for an hour, and I used to watch watch Bugs Bunny, and that was a lot more fun. But you got to stay in tune with what's happening globally and nationally, because that true other cost will be going up too. Okay. Yes.
And also, we rely so much on grants here. I mean, we have a heavy reliance on grants. And one would just try to assume from reading the tea leaves that we're not going to be getting those kinds of grants to that extent in the future.
Well, so I'm told that once the budget gets hammered out, and I haven't heard any hammers yet, but that first, for instance, the health fund, the first Indiana, will probably be going down. I did tell you I heard the governor say, I want to see people show up that are not on drugs and are, well educated or educated as much as they can, and that means a good workforce. That's really important, the health of the worker. And he was saying that he was going to really kind of try and keep that, but I'm hearing it will go down here in the future.
I mean, they announced it last night. It's a huge reduction.
I didn't hear huge yet.
Well, I mean, several million.
But when you say several million, did that mean for the county?
No, it was
total.
like, help me remember, it was like, this year was, 150, but they are projecting in the budget for next year, they had been, up until last night, 100 million per state. And now they've reduced it down to, was that 40% or 30, not 40%, 40 million, down from 100, and that 100 was already down from this year.
And again, know as well as I do, let's stay tuned once the bill's out.
But
The
they were
budget's
all
out.
there.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was the governor, and it was the House, and it was the Senate. And they were all going, yeah, this is what we got. So, they've been doing it's just
Well-
sort of, I bet they've already voted.
Yeah, so that's
isn't it?
another, in essence, miscellaneous revenue that's going to go down. But again, I'm not trying to say bad news, bad news, bad news. Let's just keep moving, and and we just got to deal with the cards that were dealt, right? every time you play cards. That's what you got to do. And this is a house of cards. So that's what we're doing on the health insurance discussion. I think we'll have it ironed out for the next meeting. And, but it is coming to a theater near you. The target fund balance resolution, I don't really want the resolution to have two numbers. I think it's harder to manage. I want to have one number. And I still think one number, because in the general fund, if we have 10 to 15 million, 10 million on one and 15 in another column, it's going to be so hard to manage. And it's not going to become a real number as the screws, I'm afraid the screws are going to get tighter on us, okay? And it's going to get tightened down on us. And so I want to try and add maybe some make it more simple, okay? And have one number that we can peg in there and just call it the target. And I would even be fine if you put the minimum. But remember, the rating agency will ask you, what's your definition of target? What's your definition of minimum? If you're between the two, okay, how are you going to fund up to the target? And I wouldn't answer that right now, yes, because I don't think I could. And we're above both. I understand that. But I'm thinking that, and this is something we're going to review each and every year, and you got to, okay? So I want to try and keep it relatively simple. I want the concept of the fund to be employed before we make a number up for the fund like the CCD. Employ the concept of the fund. The concept is it accumulates. It doesn't have a minimum. If you need to cash fund a certain capital item, then we need to cash fund it. And then it will build up automatically by the outdated 3.33 pennies. Okay. So that's kind of where we're at on that. Does staff or anybody kind of disagree with this staff member, so to speak?
No, I like the idea of one number. I agree, this is confusing, the minimum versus target.
Yeah, one, and keep it simple in the reading fashion, and we can always make it more complex. But once you get the complexity on there, then the implementation is that much harder, okay? And so, I think that's where we're at on that. So we'll be suggesting, again, after everything gets a little more solidified, the number, and I still just like calling it the target. It's the target. We don't want to go below the target. We don't go, if we're above it, great, and we're fine with that. And I think I used to get the question about what is too much of a balance. I'm not sure we're going to have to worry about that in the future. So I think it will automatically, the demand for services or the cost to provide the service is going to start exceeding the possible revenues. And so that's what I'm concerned about. And so I think cash balance is going, thank gosh, every one of my clients they have the best balance they've ever had. And we've been doing that strategically because I kept saying, the perfect storm is coming. They're like, when's it coming? I said, I don't know, but it is coming. Well, guess what? I think it came. I think it's here. I kind of hear the winds, So, okay, it's almost 12:30. I'm going to pause here for a moment and say, what have we not covered at this point in time?
I covered court cost, and it appears that they're cutting one court here. So
Cutting a court out.
cutting a court.
Oh, because I remember adding one.
Yeah, I remember adding 2. That you
Okay.
said, will you
We got
support
one
us?
with an appeal, which, by the way, appeals, the automatic growth quotient appeal is gone, and basically it's annexation appeal for cities, so.
Right, I'm just trying to figure out if it is, then that changes budget projections, and it changes probably the square foot that we need in the jail building, et cetera. Well, we'll know when it's part of the budget bill, so I do think it's,
Yeah, I
we've already
understand.
discussed how it's going to work.
I am under the understanding that the reimbursement percentages are not changing yet, that I've heard of.
They upped the reimbursement for the jail when we're holding for the DOC.
Yes, the $37.
somewhat, but not enough to really make it,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the old phrase, don't write home to mom about it, because it probably won't matter.
It'd be
So-
very expensive.
So, since we're on the other items and we're
Yes.
nearing the end, I know we were wanting to talk about KSAs, but I did kind of have a question because it's almost
ASA.
Yeah.
knowledge, skills, and abilities. So, before we get to that, I just want to ask a question of, because I'm already thinking in terms of what we see in federal government uncertainty. Obviously, Indiana State House is uncertain, and I'm curious to get your thoughts and feedback, because it's not too early to be thinking about budget sessions, and honestly, you kind of think about it at the beginning of the year, and have been thinking about it since SB 1 proposals have been put in place. My question to you would be, because I know we got some department heads here and some department heads that are watching, in terms of when we think of budget hearings and we always think about, what we can give in terms of, increases and raises for everybody, what would be your suggestion? Do we give a percentage? Do we not give a percentage? What would you suggest? Considering we are, 12/23, 4/24, 2025, and we're not done with the session yet, and obviously, they're
Right.
saying, hold my beer for next year. So I'm just curious to
I
get your
think,
feedback.
well, generally, what I'm hearing from all my other clients is that that they're going to give a raise to keep up with the inflationary impact.
Right.
They are not going to go large, and I'm hearing generally 3% or something like that to start out with. But again, major interplay with group health insurance, okay? Because, you do the 80-20 here, correct? And so, 20% gets allocated to the employee. I'd hate to say, wow, we've got a real funding issue. We now have to go to 30% funding on the employee. So I'm going to say my answer is it's got to be interplayed with where we end up with on group health insurance. It is a huge number. I think I told you, or I've told several people, in talking to the hospital systems across the state of Indiana, it was only a matter of time that the increased costs got into their program costs, which got into your insurance increment, and it was coming to a theater near you. Because a lot of people said, well, you said it was going to go up, but it was only 0. I said, it's only a matter of time. And so, if we truly do experience the 11, 12%, $1 million increase, you got to, I'm sorry, my answer may change.
Okay.
Okay? But we've got to have consensus, and again, then it's interplayed with if your department needs 7 other people, that's not going to work either. Okay? So I'm telling everybody that, the request for a new person should be coming to the county council right now, okay, if there is one, because you need to really and I'm assuming the commissioners most of the time commissioners buy off on whether it's needed or not. Then it comes to the county council for funding. In my opinion, every year from here on out, we got to start in January on budget, which we did in our first session. So, you know, you've already started budget. Those requests ought to be coming,
Oh, those requests.
if there is any.
If it's under the commissioners, whatever department, if it's not an elected official, if it's under the commissioners, then certainly they would want to be discussing it with the commissioners before they came to the council. But the elected officials certainly would never, ever go and ask permission from the commissioners if they could add a person or whatever. That's up to the county council.
Yeah, thanks for that correction.
I'm just throwing that in there before we have a barnstorm
Yeah.
here that come after us.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Want to look to my other two committee members to see if they want to.
So I guess my question, if we're kind of wrapping this up, would be, when do we meet again, right? That would be my mom all about the future. When can we nail things really down and then go on from here?
Yeah, I think we need to be meeting either late May or early June. Yeah. And keeping in mind that, you know, I know, Bree, did you want a minute or two on some of your information here that you gave council? I think some of it we really kind of chit-chatted about, but.
Yeah, I think it's already been covered sufficiently. I mean, I can answer any questions about the table, but there's just so many unknowns. I mean, this is just our best estimate at this time, so.
Yeah, and did you pass out this?
At the self-insurance?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and so that's the one kind of I was chit-chatting and we need to work out and stay tuned. But you can see you had some numbers here which had brackets.
Yes, and I mean, the self-insurance too, we're estimating based on history, and in the recent past, obviously, we had a pandemic, so it's all based on estimations. I don't think health insurance is going to go down. I think that's pretty clear. But.
So we're probably going to have to transfer, like I said, some of our cash balances, so I'm not worried about too much, you know, because we need to shore up and get ready for the next storm. When's that coming? Well, let's get this one out of the way first. But, you know, sometimes there's back-to-back storms. And it might be called 26 and 27 legislative corrections or changes.
One of the things I think we should be cautious about, but then I know I'm pretty fiscally conservative, but we have higher cash balances, and, you know, gratefully, we do. We are ready for this. This county can do this. I don't want anybody hitting the panic button like I was hearing from some. This is not the time for a panic button. This is a time for calm and deliberate and planned procedure.
Right.
Of going forward so that we can continue to be successful. I wanted to throw that out there.
That's why I used the example of the boat, you know, and waves coming over, but the boat is not sinking, and we just stay on course and do the right thing, which we've been doing here for a long time.
But what I wanted to make clear was because we do have these high cash balances, and my fear is that the department heads or others might be looking, well, look, we've got all that money in cash, and yes, we can do X, Y, and Z. And it's my theory that as we can be very cautious about spending any of that down, and as you said, we're going to have to put some in that health insurance, et cetera.
No, and I wouldn't even use the word high. I would use adequate, because it's, you know, they're adequate balances, but they also have to be realigned in some places.
Coming down. So I just would like for everyone to understand that while it may look like we have a balance now, we're not even through with the end of the year. We have, you know, have the appropriations still going for the rest of the year. But I think we need to be cautious, and put a major pause on this. Of course, I've been saying that for a while, and people don't like that really, but we don't know. Just like you've said, you've had to assume some of these things because they're not through at the state. We don't know what they're doing.
I disagree.
So I look forward to our next meeting because we'll have better numbers then that we can really feel like we can rely on more.
But again, they will be as of that date because there is corrections that need to be made. There's no doubt about it.
They thought the fiscal numbers that they were getting was not right on some of them.
And just one other update, Jeff, we are still meeting with bond council at some point in time about the capital projects and things like that, so.
Yeah, we've scheduled the meeting, I think it's early June. We scheduled a couple months ago that we were going to get back with the bond council to talk about, next steps for our jail project. And so that meeting may be a little more interesting after Senate Bill 1, but we're going to have it, and anything pops out of it, we'll let you know.
What's the deadline date that we need to get that done? And then we have to give it the year's pause? Or it's part of that legislation going back to capture something that took place, our last bond?
I'm going to say from a lit standpoint, there's no timeline because we might be in a pause a little bit.
I thought we were talking about that ongoing debt that we do every year.
No, I think what I'm meeting with them about is the jail project, right?
Okay. So-
I've not reached out to about the annual debt issuance since Senate Bill 1 passed. Prior to that, I touch based every once in a while, but it was always, as of right now kind of statements, and as of right now, it's always changed every time we've had it. So I've not reached back out to them yet.
We need to look at that.
Yeah, we will be.
So essentially, to kind of wrap up here as we are closing, we just need to continue to proceed with caution. No sense of going haywire and crazy, even though it feels like turbulence is coming from all avenues right now, but it's just that we need to proceed with caution, and we need to continue and tighten our belts, which
Very
is...
well said.
Okay.
So, could I have one more question?
Sure.
So, when you mentioned something about your clients are saying 3% for raises, how did they come up with those percentages? What do they base it on? Is there some CPI or?
No, it really, they've looked at all kinds of things and the fact that, that may not be raises in the future. So the salary committees discussed it, looked at all kinds of things, but it was really not based upon, that one index, because you'll get yourself in trouble doing that. So it was what, basically came down what the gut feel was. And it was the starting point. It was not the absolute point.
Could go either way.
Yes.
Okay. Right.
Okay.
Have we discussed the KSA as much as we were going to? I thought we were going to.
Want to go ahead and do
Beg your
that?
pardon?
Do you want to go ahead and ask?
Right. As of now, what has been happening is that a year ago or 2 years ago, the county council, and I don't mean to be speaking negative about it, but I didn't vote for this, so I didn't think it was a good idea from the beginning. But there was like this, that the HR person and a person from the council office could meet and decide if an applicant for a job would qualify to start at a higher, and so they'd been there for 3 years or 5 years or whatever it was. And then they would send out a message to the county council by email, and if you caught it in amongst your 100 other emails you got that day, and if you thought there was some reason we needed to put a pause on it and concern, then you send it, and one person could say, no, we're going to have to bring that back to the entire council. So it only takes one person, because I was told by our legal staff that actually was like a first reading and a salary ordinance. Now, if no one said anything, and the other departments didn't know, public didn't know anything, suddenly somebody got a $9,000 raise. It should be to start out with, because they started out as though they had been here longer. Now, I mean, I have lots of reasons why that whole situation gives me heartburn, but in addition to which, each time, that's like spending that 9,000, even if it's budgeted higher, but the person left, and so they've got a line item where it's paying more, but that's actually spending down our cash reserves. That could come back to our cash reserves. So I had hoped that this council, so that we would quit having the debate about it and dragging it out for some people having to wait so long, because I won't go long, and I'm not going to. I mean, I'm just not, because I don't think we ought to be spending the money in that such a way. But so anyway, so it was the discussion. I'm not bringing this up on my own. It was discussion that we were going to talk about this and give some kind of suggestion back to the council, because we can't decide anything.
Right, and I think that, again, so basically, if a person is coming in, and it's up on that's our resolution there, it's up on the screen there. So as Marty was expressing, they have it budgeted. And so therefore, I think the argument that some people are saying is, if they have it budgeted and it's not a direct additional funds that's coming out, then we should be able to proceed with the KSA. That's what some people are saying. I'm saying some, because not all of us obviously are on the same page. But we do need to have, at the last part of the meeting, and I think you might have left after that, Marty, we did come back and say that we do need to, want to circle it back at our May 13th meeting, so that we can go ahead and discuss, if we're going to have other departments come through for future KSA requests, what does this mean, and what would be your interpretation? Because again, some people are thinking, if it's already budgeted and a person leaves and they have somebody else that's coming in that they want to fill that, position with, then can they proceed, or should we just overall just stop it altogether?
And KSA stands for knowledge, skills, and abilities, yes.
Council have a comment before speak? I have not read this document, okay? And I do want to ask a preliminary question. So if that position has a range, right, in the salary ordinance, the range, we'll just make one up, 30 to 40. Okay, and the person leaves, and the new person comes in at 30, and then they get what I'm going to call an automatic step increase, so to speak, up to 39, you staying with your 9. And so, and the 40 was what was budgeted in the line item in 2025. Now, I will tell you, my concern on it from a financial standpoint is we had less revenues in total than we had total budget in 2025 because of the increased salaries that were still coming in. So I'm going to say that if you have revenues that are less than budget, you're automatically having a drawdown in cash balances because of that, if 25 plays out as it's estimated at this point in time. I don't know if you've done any 12/31/2025 estimate of cash balance, but we have in the sustainability, and you want to take a look at that, and because that's my concern. Now, if we don't automatically go to 9, I'm not talking about justification, but usually I'm not seeing those type of changes I see them in every year, mandatory step increases, and I always say, my point on the 3% is, wait a minute, let's also factor in, before we get the 3% increase overall, what is the mandatory step increase amount that we have to budget for? Remember, I brought that up at the last meeting and said, we got to have those dollars before you get me nailed down on a percentage. And so it would help if it didn't go to 9, because I understand it's in the budget, but I also understand the budget's higher than the revenues at this point in time. So you got to understand part 2 to the part 1 question. So you know, it makes it a tough call. I understand. And the question was that negotiated at the very beginning? I'm assuming in your hypothetical that you put, or what you put together, is it was. Is that right? Yeah. And so, you know, from a dollar and cent standpoint, every dollar matters.
It reverts back. We count every year when we're looking at budgets, we're saying, but we're counting on the X number of dollars of reversion. So if that department doesn't spend that $9,000 or whatever, if it's in county general, it would possibly revert back for our balances to begin the next
And
year.
I would say reverting back kind of says restoration, but I'm still cautioning you that we may have more expenses than revenue. And that was what I preliminarily told you, and that's my concern.
Yeah. And
Bring it
again,
back
I
so we
think
can take-
that the whole point that people argue with it, like for KSA, is because if you have a vacant position that is sitting, and if you can bring somebody in at that level which is already budgeted, that helps keep it helps the department. Otherwise, I see it from the departments, and this is in my other area. If you have a vacancy and everybody's trying to do what they can for that vacancy, and you can't get somebody in at the current amount that is, you know, which is it's advertised, and you have somebody that you can put in at that higher amount that is budgeted, that can potentially help, you know, get a candidate to come in. Otherwise, I think the department's concerns, and I've heard it in meetings that we've had, and we heard it, you know, previously this past week, is that, you know, people are getting tapped out to the point where if you don't fill that position, then potentially you have an issue where you will start to lose people because that position wasn't filled, and therefore you can't get these other positions that are filled, and it
I
costs more.
totally agree,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I've totally seen
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So
Policy
that's why it's a tough, you can't make a blanket
Right,
statement.
right.
Because I've seen that everywhere. That happens. That's true.
I just think the whole thing is a policy thing and probably not a part of the long-term finance committee, because I think that's really a policy decision to be made. Brought it up because I was
Which
told we were going
again,
to
I
talk
think
about it.
that, and again, it was something that we discussed on Tuesday, and since it was discussed on Tuesday, that's what we're doing. And I don't think we're trying to make a decision. We three can't make a decision for all 7 of us. So the idea, again, for anybody that's watching, is to have that discussion with this particular group so we can take our findings from today to bring it to our next meeting to discuss as a full council.
In my, you know, it becomes almost a case by case.
Right.
But you can't let it become a floodgate.
Right, exactly. And that's, you know, Councilor Huck's concern is very valid. I always like to say everybody's concerns are valid. And, you know, maybe we all have a difference of opinions with that, but everybody should be concerned with those things, which is, again, why May 13th is going to be our meeting that we hammer stuff out, hopefully. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate our council members taking the time to do this here. Learned a lot for food for thought, and again, it sounds like we just have to continue to stay tuned and see how the boat proceeds. So, all right.
So how will the next meeting date be determined? I'm all about the future.
I think we can discuss that.
Okay.
I don't think that's necessarily something, but I do think that June, we should definitely think about. So I think we can look at our calendars and see,
Yeah,
because
and I didn't bring my
obviously-
calendar.
Yeah.
It's electronic. but-
Yeah, and we can take a look into that,
Yeah.
because by June, we're gearing up for budget.
Okay.
And we should have, hopefully, an idea of, you know, finalized things that the State House has done that you can bring to us that gives us food for thought, how we proceed in our budget hearing. So,
Thanks
okay.
for being here.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.